Hello and welcome to At the 55, your home for U Sports football. Me and Tom are back on the mics with a new installment of the Exit Meetings. We started off in Ontario. We headed out to the AUS. We headed out to the left coast, and we are back in the AUS, taking you to the Ville to talk a little Axemen football. We'll go through the roster, the highlights of last year, the room for growth, and everything, and so much more. But first, Tom, how the heck are you doing, my friend?
I'm always doing well when I get to talk U Sports football with you, my man. Interested to get into a little Acadia Axemen football here. Obviously, not the season that they really wanted going into this one, but lots of new faces in key places. Still, obviously, trying to figure out their identity from an offensive standpoint and from a defensive standpoint. Lots of things to work on, but a lot of bright spots in here, too, I think.
Most definitely. I feel like Acadia, as we've begun to look at some of the AUS teams, obviously with the Scott Brady ties, draws us to Mount A. Obviously, with what Saint FX has been doing for a number of years, with Coach Waterman there, with Silas Fagnon, have been at the forefront of our attention. This Huskies team and St. Mary's with Coach Samara has been awesome with that defense in these past couple of years. And obviously, Bishop's, entering the league, having success, now bolting back to Quebec, has drawn, I'd say, the bulk of our attention and starting to extend our coverage. So I'm actually really excited to have this podcast because I think it forced us, I'll speak for myself more specifically, to dive into some of the ins and outs. And I want to start off with, we'll obviously get to the players. We'll talk about the season itself, but obviously the name Jeff Cummings, head coach of this program, is a name that, you hear forever, and for good reasons, because it's going into his 21st season come the 26th U Sports season. And it's just, again, one of those names that I feel like, for myself, not having done the deep dive into Acadia football or just, again, dipping our toes now into AUS football generally, to really appreciate just what this man's done and the football track record. Tom, I don't know if you have some of the numbers in front of you, a bit about Jeff Cummins. Again, a name that I feel like we all know, we all hear, we throw about. Again, we think AUS football, yeah, Coach Cummins. But to really take the time to talk about what he's done over this 2-decade career at Acadia.
Yeah, he's been named a 6-time AUS Coach of the Year, 1-time U Sports Frank Tyndall Coach of the Year. He's won 6 Loney Bowl championships while he's been there. Like you mentioned, he's going into his 21st season, and it just showcases he's a hell of a football coach. I mean, there's a lot of people, the stats that things kind of get read out, and we've certainly talked about it as well, as this idea of, well, the AUS hasn't been back to the Vanier Cup since 2007. And I can't speak for all of those teams, but I've said this before. In that 2011 season, after we won the Yates, we went out east and we played against Acadia. That Acadia team was really good. We were losing that game for the majority of it until we came back in the third and fourth quarter, kind of started to pull away. But a number of really great players, great recruits, or great athletes, and just a great coaching game plan when we went into that. They really came out firing, tried to capitalize on a lot of things that they did well and that we didn't. So I think I've always had such a huge respect for Coach Cummings and for that program as well. And it's surprising, but also not surprising to hear of all of the accolades that he has accrued over his time.
Most certainly. And as well in that 2011 team, working with that, the senior national team as well, has some other experiences working with the Canadian national program, senior and junior. Again, a name that we need to put more respect on. He's a dude. He's a guy. He's a guy's dude. He's a Canadian football legend. And of course, we stole him from the U.S. to begin with. So love it when we can take one of theirs. Now, turning to this past season for Coach Cummins and his Axemen, obviously, as you allude to, not the season that they would have desired, go 2-6 on the year. The 2 wins coming against Mount Allison, the second of which on Acadia's homecoming, having to do a little bit of a comeback versus Mount A. And you know what? Like, obviously, we talked with Coach Brady a few weeks ago. Love what's happening over there. A lot of positives, a lot of positive trajectory going on. And to me, this is a fascinating thing when we dive into some of the numbers, some of the players, because when you look at the story of this year for Acadia, for starters, again, let's put aside, folks listening out there, if they want to start comparing when we talk about the defense, like it's okay for us to talk about the great defenses of the AUS without people saying, well, what about Montreal? What about Laval? What about Saskatchewan? What about Laurier? Again, we're talking AUS football here right now, folks, okay? Let's just cherish and appreciate what they're doing out there. And I say all that to say, again, with these small conferences, as we talked about with CanWest, as we talked about already with the AUS and going over Mount Allison, you get those more repeated games. And why I'm saying that is you have to look at a team in Acadia, and all these teams deal with it, who has to deal with a St. Mary's Huskies defense, arguably one of the top in the nation, right? That's beyond any AUS like bias or anything like that. Again, a St. Mary's defense, Ryan Butler, Callan Edwards, all those cats out there just dominating, again, giving Montreal a fight at times in that national semifinal game. We have a St. FX team with a guy in Owen Wattrich breaking records as a linebacker for that team. And of course, a Bishops team that fell off a little bit from their, I don't remember if it was record setting, but surely like stellar defense that by the numbers, again, put aside conference play and this, that, and the third, that in 2024, you had like Laval's defense, and then it was Bishops right there, both like letting up like less than 10 points or something gaudy like that. So within their conference, this is a team that's having to go up against top defenses in the AUS. Like there's no denying that to begin with. And when you look at then again, we'll go through some of the names, some offensive pieces, a few young guys, especially looking at the running backs, a couple quarterbacks that they're bouncing around. But again, a lot of promise there when we talk about this team in the scope of the AUS. Tom, when we think about the offense for Acadia, or when we think about maybe, let's just start with the record on the year, looking at, again, 2 competitive games with Mountain, coming victorious in both of those. One is a comeback. But then, again, I look at, losing to teams like St. Mary's and St. FX and Bishops. Again, like, these are strong teams. St. FX was probably the most that, Fagnon was a little banged up, but again, with Wattrich, with Coach Waterman, with some of those pieces in the skill position, and of course what Bishops with Justin Quirion and all the things St. Mary's did, like that, the top of that AUS, those top 3 teams are very strong. So it's fair that at the end of the day, you got to take care of business against Mount A if you're Acadia right now with where your program's at, and you did that.
Yeah, I mean, you start looking at the makeup of the AUS. Certainly last year, obviously with Bishops leaving, this will change, but it was the 3 at the top, and then Acadia, Mount Allison. And the gap between the 3 on those 2 was fairly substantial here. And even with that, going into the latter part of the season, they played St. FX tight right before their homecoming game, going 20-10 as the final. There's signs of life there. They can put things together. Now, that's also with St. FX's, on that bit of a lull themselves near the mid to back end of that season. But still, to capitalize and to do some good things in that game, I think there's a lot of things to be excited about. For me, like, the biggest piece that really sticks out to me, even in the victory that they have against against Mount Allison, is the amount of rotations that we've seen at quarterback. Michael Linder, Tyron Duval, like a number of guys that are listed as not quarterbacks, as receivers and everything else, who are in there hucking the ball around. And, it doesn't really seem like any one of them is having some real legitimate success. I mean, even in the game against Mount Allison that they won, the homecoming game, Michael Linder, 13 for 23, 135 yards, no touchdowns, 2 interceptions. And then Tyron Duval, 7 for 12 for 82 yards and 1 touchdown, no interceptions. But this is a team that really struggled, obviously, in the quarterbacking spot. And especially in Canadian university football, you cannot be successful without some top quality quarterback play. So that, just to start things off before you look at anything else, is a pretty good indicator of why that offense seemed to struggle so much.
Definitely. And honestly, if without, we didn't dive into like every single game to look at, when they took Duval out, was it injury? Was it them trying to mix it up? Certainly seemed like, at the end of the day, the most sort of production they got at any given point was with him in at quarterback. It seemed like the connection that he had with Xander Matheson, I believe it is, was perhaps the best, sort of 1-2 punch that they were sort of trotting out on a weekly basis. So, without knowing too much as far as what was going into those decisions, we've talked about so many times when you have 2 quarterbacks, or in this case, possibly 3, possibly 4 quarterbacks, you might have no quarterbacks. It feels like Duval's the guy. But to that point, we talked about Coach Cummins being there for the 2+ decades now, and that tradition in Acadia. Well, talking about tradition for Acadia football, an old face, but a new face at the same time. New offensive coordinator last year and quarterback coach Chris Colson, former quarterback with actually I'm not sure if he was quarterback, but yeah, former player with Acadia, former team captain, and as well coached in the Ottawa area for quite a while, both with the Ravens, and most importantly, to my eyes, with the GGs in the Brad Sinopoli days. Right. We spend so much time talking about that golden era of quarterbacking in the late 2000s, mid to late 2000s. Sinopoli is as much a name from that era as anyone else. So first year with the program last year, maybe it stands to reason that him coming in wants to kind of get a sense of where all these guys are at. I don't have the date in terms of, maybe he joined the club a bit late, maybe didn't get a full off season. I don't know. That's all speculative on my part. But the track record speaks to itself. He's an Acadia man. He's spent some time working with one of the best U Sport quarterback that we've had this century. And again, when you look at some of these guys and, being someone on the outside looking in, well, very much on the outside looking in, guy like Duval, some younger quarterbacks backing him up, I'd say it's pretty exciting to think of what he can do, along with some other talent around him in the skill position. And of course, beyond being the CEO of the team in Coach Cummins as the head man, he coaches up that O-line. He knows what he's talking about there. I think there's some potential, especially as we're seeing, again, Bishop's leaving the conference, that obviously being a defense that was really strong. St. Mary's, we'll have to see who returns on that defense. I'm certain, as we've talked about, they will still be the class of that team. St. FX in a bit of a transition period, no doubt themselves, and Mount A being similar to Acadia and starting to build. Where this is an offense that I think in the AUS, with Coach Colson in there, with Coach Cummins continuing to do his thing with the O-line, that I'm really excited to see how he'll fully be able to make his impact, put his imprint on his old stomping grounds, on these Axemen.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see the development of that offense within Acadia. He obviously, like you mentioned, his first year was this year. He took over for Tom Flaxman, who was the offensive coordinator with them, but left to be the director of scouting for the Hamilton Tiger Cats. I believe
pretty solid gig.
Yeah, pretty solid, I'd say. Your whole entire job is just to watch football games and try to suss out talent.
It's like what we do, but actually getting paid to do it.
Yeah, that's the dream. But obviously he's got a really impressive track record, and you can argue the fact of, well, you got a guy like a Brad Sinopoli. A lot of the time he's making some of those great plays, but even in a system like that where he is taking off and running or doing some great things, you still have to be in a system where you can do all of those things. So Colson making sure that he had that as an option there helped set that up. Obviously, been to a couple of Yates Cups while he was over in the OC at Ottawa as well, so has some of that championship experience. I think it's only going to be a really great thing. I think you obviously have to get that quarterback situation set up. Whoever's going to be your guy, you recruit somebody else to bring him in. Like, you have to get that sorted. In the games that I was able to see, I didn't watch a whole ton of Acadia football during the season, admittedly. I like Noah Potter, the running back for Acadia. I think he's got some solid numbers and he's got some solid talent here. Even on the year, he finishes with 406 rushing yards and a touchdown. And nothing to write home about by any means. Certainly, there's a number of really great running backs that are in the AUS even that you can go out from. But when you have got a struggle at quarterback, of course, you're going to have teams that load up against the run because that's what they're expecting to come out of this. And to still put up some decent numbers there, running for over 100 yards in that Mount Allison victory, and no secret as to why they were able to move the ball and to do whatever else. I think there's, again, solid pieces here. I think it's going to take a little bit of time for that offense to really get things going. Hopefully this is a very big off season for them, both in the recruiting vein and in the just generally understanding the offense a little bit more, getting them a little bit more in depth with it and moving on. But I think when you look at Coach Cummings' track record, when you look at Coach Colson's track record, I think there's a lot of things to be really excited about for the future, but obviously struggled a fair bit in this season. You and I like to joke the stats page here on U Sports, when you're looking it up, it goes from 1 to 25, and there's 27 teams in U Sports. If you got to go to the next page to find anything, it's typically not a good sign. And in both offensive points and yards, you got to go to the second page for Acadia.
Yeah, we don't love that. What I do love is you bring up Noah Potter. First year running back, as you said, out of PEI, I was having a blast watching some Atlantic Bowl highlights from 2022. Young man, 6'1". His high school highlights, kid looks like PEI's own Derrick Henry, a much whiter, admittedly much smaller version of Derrick Henry, but by comparison, the guy looked like a monster out there. And he kind of looks like he has that track speed when he gets to the open field. Those long limbs, just boom! It's a beautiful thing to watch. And mentioned the connection that Duval had with Xander Matheson, third-year receiver. Also, Chase LeBlanc for them as well, picking up 33 receptions, leading the team, second-year guy there. So again, having the time to build that rhythm. As far as those skill guys, if you just think of a core of Potter, LeBlanc, and Matheson, that's a pretty strong core, if I may say so myself. Now, when you mention having a big offseason, bringing players in, one of the things that stood out to me, and I'll try to land the plan on this to make this the transition into talking about the defense ultimately, is that as we've started to take stock of some of the AUS rosters, obviously when we were looking at St. Mary's, there was a couple Toronto region guys that made their way onto that roster. But as we've talked about, and this was something that came up in our conversation with Coach Brady, and as we talk about all these programs, it starts with owning your backyard, say the least. But when you go through this roster, you don't have to look far to be able to see Ottawa, Winnipeg, Calgary, Saddle Lake, Alberta, Saskatoon, Abbotsford, Lloydminster, Calgary, Red Deer. It goes on and on. Alexandria, they're recruiting all the way out in Egypt under the shadows of the bloody pyramids. Oh my goodness. No, what a commute that is for Mr. Khalid Solomon on the O-line. You gotta love it. Putting all that aside, so for one aspect, you'll love to see that. Obviously own your backyard, but they're clearly, getting their claws out globally. But I want to talk about the defense, because as far as when we look at some of the guys out of province for them, one of the names that comes to mind, what really jumps out, is fifth-year linebacker in Graham Nightingale out of the Ottawa region. I forget if it was this year or I think it was in 24, leads the team 53 tackles. And that's phenomenal. But as I mentioned, fifth-year linebacker. And he's also joined that linebacking core with two other fifth-year teammates of his, one in Brandon Kamens, who led them this year with 52 combined tackles, 3.5 sacks. And then Riley Camo, also picking up somewhere in the mid-30s with tackles. Now, they got some guys in the wings waiting behind him. Costa Zanis, another linebacker, fourth-year guy. Matthew Shannon, who had some production this year for them. But that is a core three in the linebacking core. Presumptively, to lose those guys, as much as we were talking about the promise on the offensive side, without diving too thoroughly, and they got a young kid on this D-line we should talk about as well, and a young defensive back, also brother of Mr. Nightingale, Owen Nightingale, who looked to be promising young pieces. But by golly, that's a tough pill to swallow when, again, not having gone through a depth chart, yet assume their top three tacklers all listed at linebacker are probably in some form or fashion your Will, Mike, and your Sam.
Yeah, that's a tough thing to deal with. If that is the case, and it surely, even if it's not exactly the case, it is. Those three guys had a fair bit of playing experience and had a lot of minutes because of just purely all the tackles and the stats that they rack up. So that'll be a big thing to look at and to have to be aware of. The one piece that I do like about this is the lone AUS All-Star that they had, who was one Rory Litt. He is listed as a defensive end on the AUS standings, but on Acadia's website, they have him as a linebacker. So he's at bare minimum that dual threat type where he can blitz off the edge as your pass rusher. Did fairly well during the regular season, 7.5 sacks on the year. That's a really great number to have. And if he has the ability to play, even if that's that will linebacker where you're not really asking him to cover all that much and help in with run defending and then blitzing him a bunch, That's a great spot to be in, and a guy in his third year as well. So he's definitely going to come back. Likely going to go out to East West. We'll probably have front row seats to see him at Waterloo this year, which would be pretty nice. But as you rock the East West merch that we got last year, yeah, there's a lot of things to be excited about still. I think Rory Litt being one of the big ones, but having to replace an entire linebacking core worth of great players, that's not an easy task to do.
No, it's a tough pill to swallow, for sure. As I mentioned, alongside Graham Nightingale, his younger brother Owen Nightingale, obviously also out of the Ottawa region, racked up 2 interceptions this year in his second year. Again, clearly, there's talent within the bloodline, to say the least. So a nice player to be able to build around, nonetheless. And you know what? Again, just going back to this piece on recruiting from different parts of the country, not to jump right back into looking at, just the offensive side of the ball, but when we look at, quarterback, again, presumptive starting quarterback in Tyron Duvall coming in from Abbotsford, fourth-year quarterback, but then at the same time, one of the quarterbacks, or one of the players, I should say, getting reps for them at quarterback. Where is he? I just had him up here. Where is he? He was Mr. Sadu, who's listed as a wide receiver, getting some reps to them at quarterback as well. The first thing that comes to mind for me is obviously thinking about a guy like, Gurjan Sadu, is thinking about a guy like Russell Weir at Queens, how they were able to use him as that kind of utility guy and put him under center at times, take those QB sneaks. But all of a sudden, if you wanted to say, oh, actually, we're in shotgun all of a sudden, it's a great element to be able to throw in the mix. Certainly, I wouldn't, again, without watching more tape on them, be willing to say it's a Marshall McRae type situation, because Marshall McRae is a quarterback first and foremost, who's also a great athlete, but nothing to sneeze at in terms of being able to have that versatility, and with someone like Coach Colson at the helm being able to sort of put his guys in the positions they want to, and Gurjan also coming in from Colquhoun, BC. So again, clearly these QBs, these skill guys, liking something that's happening in Acadia. Hey, whatever the messaging is going out to these guys, they certainly know more about it than we do. I'd say there's something there. It's on the everything, something or nothing. I'd say it's firmly in that something category. And I think, again, with Coach Colson, it'll be fascinating to be able to see how this progresses with a full offseason, where he wants to put these pieces in place. But I think if we're in this position next year, again, looking at a distribution of reps amongst quarterbacks, 127 attempts for one guy, 64 for another, 31 for another. I'm going to go ahead and assume we're looking at another 2-6, 1-7, 3-5 type year for them. As we alluded to, they got to sort that out. But we say that about all these teams, all these quarterbacks. So no difference there when we talk about the Axemen. Tom, obviously, again, a team we're becoming more familiar with, certainly outside looking in. What other thoughts do you have about this Acadia club from what we can see going into 2026 and the way too early broadcast we're doing?
Well, we talked a lot about the new face on offense with Coach Colson coming in. I think we have to talk about the fact that Coach Brandon Dubbs, the defensive coordinator, this was also his first year calling up the defense. He was previously the special teams coordinator in 2024 and made the transition over into being the D coordinator. So having 2 different brand new coordinators in the same year, lots of instability, lots of stuff for those guys to learn and be on the fly. So that's another big aspect into this. But again, you can talk about a guy who's got a ton of really great experience. He was on those Mount Allison teams as a coach when Coach Brady was there, leading them to their best season ever in that 2014 season, back-to-back Loney Bowls. He went over to St. Mary's from 2017 to 2021. He was a part of a couple of those teams that made the Loney Bowl appearances. So lots of championship experience there. Bringing that to Acadia, I think it's only going to get better and better as things go here. And with another year, and again, a full off season to properly get things going, do spring camp and do a bunch of stuff that way. I think that's another really big thing to be excited about. What I would love to see, and again, in this process of us expanding out our coverage, that means trying to learn and try to be educated as best as possible at the happenings within the conferences and kind of outside of them as well. I wonder if there's an opportunity for them to do, hey, we're going to do a spring camp scrimmage. Dalhousie, why don't you come in because you're not a part of the AUS, but you're still playing competitive football or whatever that league is. If you can bring that in for your spring camp, then you're not going up against teams that you're going up against 4 times in a year.
I'm so happy you brought up Dalhousie because I was going to mention it's going to be a few pods till we're back in the AUS. Going to finally make our trip out to Quebec. We're going to return for some OUA action, make our way back out west, I believe. Yes, indeed. Before we make our way back to the AUS. And I figured this would be an interesting time, and we'll probably maybe between now and when we talk about St. FX, because they'll be the next on the, oh, pardon me, Bishops. My apologies to the good people of St. FX and Coach Waterman's squad. And we can maybe learn a bit more between now and then about not only Dalhousie, but UNB, University of New Brunswick. You talked about how the separation between those top 3 and now top 2, and again, St. FX is going to look a lot different next year with Fagnon moving on and Bussy moving on and Fogarty, I think, moving on. Some of those, and Harrington, I think, is moving on. Really, St. Mary's and the rest of that conference. And how it's that big jump. And frankly, again, smaller conference. So, but I think if you sort of scale it up to the OUA, like you look at the cream of the crop of the OUA and compare it to the teams at the bottom, like we can say the same thing. It's just that there's more teams. So there is that middle class that can kind of on any given day give a scare to those teams above and be maybe shocked by the teams below. I say this out of pure ignorance of the state of UNB Dalhousie football. And as you said, whatever that league is, again, apologies. I'm happy they're playing football. What do we got to do to amalgamate them into the AUS? Again, this isn't a shot at Acadia Mount Allison by any means. I would just be surprised for universities that have obviously university athletes, because that's just what you are as a proxy of being an athlete in university. You're a young man aged 18 to 23, 24 years old or so in the gym, working out, doing all your things, watching football, studying the game. And please, someone out there, correct me. Would it be that big a jump? And obviously, when a team makes that transition into a league like I'm sort of proposing here, hey, may they get their hats handed to them the first year in just the change of pace and change of just coaching. You're dealing with all that type of stuff. Hey, maybe. But if you both enter at the same time, you make sure they get the 2 games against one another where they can kind of duke it out with each other. I don't know who else might be in that league. I don't know the extent of it. Again, this is both completely out of ignorance. I say this, but a call to those who know more to correct me. So when we get back to that Bishops pod and our future pods with still St. FX and St. Mary's to talk about, I'd love to look at what is the possibility of that happening. Obviously, there's financial components that play into it, but I'd love to see what possible tenability there is in that.
Yeah, completely. I would love to just get a little bit more educated on what's happening here, why they aren't in here. I believe the league is called the AFL. I have to imagine that's the Atlantic Football League. And it looks like they play against Holland College, University of New Brunswick, and the Falcons. It just says Falcons here on their schedule. I'm not sure who the Falcons are out there, but I'm sure somebody else can correct us. But again, like I think in my opinion, it's only ever a great thing the more teams kind of get brought in, and especially not a team like Bishops that has to travel and cause other people to travel. But like, you want to talk about great rivalries, you got the Battle of Waterloo. How about the Battle of Halifax between Dalhousie and St. Mary's? Like, that would be electric to see something like that, especially as that kind of pops off and does their thing as well. So selfishly, because we love Canadian university football and U Sports football in particular, hey, Dalhousie, AFL, come on over. Come on over, join. Just turn that AFL into an AUS, baby. Come on over. We'd love to have you.
And then, how often over the years is there conversation of the CFL expanding out east? I think this would be, I don't know, I'm sure there's a fair argument to say it would have no bearing on it whatsoever. I think we could have a conversation to say that, like, the prospect of more U Sports teams in the Atlantic provinces and the Maritimes playing U Sport football, again, just growing that game, giving kids more opportunities to get more exposure. Because again, not knowing a lick about the AFL, I have to imagine if you have any aspirations of CFL, that just is not the pathway.
Yep.
So, hey, for the kids at those schools, and look, we're talking about you, like, and again, I don't know about those other two clubs, but we're talking about UNB and talking about Dalhousie. Like, we are talking about prominent universities in Canada. UNB, I think, is one of the top hockey schools in the country, if memory serves. Dalhousie is again, it's just one of the schools. Like, Dalhousie's got terrific programs. These aren't just like random schools. Again, I don't mean to be throwing shit at those other two. I'm speaking out of my arse on all this, but this is our official, like, let's make the 6-team AUS happen. We'll have to come up with a neat little slogan with it and put it all over social media. But no sleep until UNB and Dalhousie are in the AUS. That's my protest. I won't sleep a wink until that happens. Tom, it looks like you're looking up a few extra things there. So I'll just kind of throw it to you. Final thoughts on all things Acadia, Axemen, AUS football. Just put a nice little bow on our conversation today.
Yeah, I think that, again, from even just purely a coaching standpoint, I think there's a lot of things to be really excited about when you come to Acadia here. Between Coach Colson and Coach Dubs, I think they bring a lot to the table. The guy who's coaching the special teams is Coach Peter Fraser, who used to be the head coach at Mount Allison as well. So you've got that experience. I think there's a lot of positive things that are happening here. And certainly with Bishop's leaving, I'm hoping that means Acadia can now start to get a few more of those recruits in that area, can start to really close the gap between St. FX and between St. Mary's, because as it stands right now, obviously we need to see what happens, and we'll get to them. You start looking at St. FX with all the guys that they're losing there, there's a very strong possibility that it could be St. Mary's, St. FX, Mount A, and Acadia. So let's see who can close the gap, who can really make that leap. And once you get into the playoffs, you get into the Loney Bowl, anything can happen, but you got to get there first.
Most definitely. We know they got the guy leading the way for them because he's done it many times before. Again, big salute to you, Coach Cummins, and your just storied career there with the Axemen. And no doubt before you hang him up, we'll see him again at the top of the mountain. Though it'll be a few weeks till we're back talking AUS action, I always hate to say things like this because it puts me in the realm of over-promising and under-delivering, but I feel good saying that you might get a bonus pod for us with a guest who may have recently been inducted into the Acadia Axemen Sports Hall of Fame. Just trying to firm up that time, so it won't be the last time you hear us talk Acadia football. It certainly won't be the last time you hear us talk AUS football, though the next time you're going to hear us, we're finally making a stop in La Belle Provence to talk a little Quebec football. You can check the stands to figure out who that's going to be, and we'll be talking about that team next week right here at the 55.